let's get started with our educational part, fluorocarbon line. Now look at, in the big scheme of things, fishing line is probably the least expensive part of everything that we do, right? You know, it definitely doesn't cost the same as a rod or a reel or some of the baits that we use, but it is the most important piece of our presentation puzzle. Number one, it's our only link between us and the fish of a lifetime, right? If we ever hook that fish, or any fish that we catch, but definitely if we get a chance to catch fish for a lifetime, the only link between us and that fish is the fishing line. That has to be good. The right fishing line also makes the presentation good. There are applications that if you don't use the right fishing line, take vertical jigging for example, right? If you use a really soft, low diameter mono, you're not going to catch as many fish as you do with a braid. And fishing line is application specific. In 2022, one of the things that I think has come a long, long way from the old days is fishing line and picking the right exact fishing line, abrasion resistance, proper amount of stretch, the right diameter, the right ability to see it or to have the fish not see it. Those things, we can get really specific with our fishing line. That's what I want to talk about tonight, focusing on fluorocarbon lines. So let's go ahead, and get started. So fluorocarbon line, what are the huge advantages of fluorocarbon? Why is this such a big deal? Well, number one, the biggest advantage of fluorocarbon is not negatively affected by UV rays or water. Two things that kill monofilament are sunlight and water. Well, we have a tendency to catch a lot of fish in the water outside. So sunlight and water kills monofilament. It destroys the molecular, easy for me to say, the molecular structure. It breaks the line down, makes it necessary to change line often if you're using monofilament. Fluorocarbon does not do that. You can leave your rods out in the sun. You can leave your line just being out in the day, like I do in the pontoon. I just leave everything on the pontoon. In the water, it's not going to soak up water and stretch and lose its properties like monofilament does. So it makes it a much better option for a lot of fishing. Because of that, it lasts longer than monofilament. We're not changing it as often. We're not recalibrating, because as monofilament gets wet, it starts to stretch. So you have to recalibrate every once in a while, even if the line doesn't wear out, because it loses its actual diameter. The diameter gets smaller and it doesn't fill the reel as much. Fluorocarbon is great in specific applications. We're going to talk about those a little bit later tonight. And one of the things that I think is probably the least important part of fluorocarbon, but was a big deal when fluorocarbon first came out, the refractive index of fluorocarbon is about the same as the refractive index of water, which means we are assuming it's basically invisible to the fish. So we'll see. Another thing that I forgot to put there, fluorocarbon, the right fluorocarbon in the right situation is more sensitive than a mono is. Something to think about. So those are the advantages of fluorocarbon line. All right, let's talk about the different types of fluorocarbon line, because one of the mistakes I see a lot of people make is they use fluorocarbon as a very generic, yeah, I use fluorocarbon. Well, okay, that's like saying I drive a car, right? Fluorocarbon is very, very, very specific. So let's talk about the first type of fluorocarbon I think we need to know as walleye fishermen, and that's a leader material. I use Sunline Super Fluorocarbon. That is my favorite. It's very inexpensive. It's a little bit thicker diameter. It's very abrasion resistant and very stiff, which is what a leader material should be if we're running leaders for vertical jigging, if we're running leaders for trolling, if we're trying crawler harnesses. This is the line you want to use. You want to use a good quality leader material. I like Sunline Super Fluoro. Abrasion resistant, a little bit higher diameter. It's the stiffest of the fluorocarbons. And again, it's great for leaders, harnesses, tying up trolling rigs, right? If you're going to tie meat rigs for salmon fishing, you want a very, very stiff leader material fluorocarbon. So anytime you are at the business end, you want to make sure that you're using a leader material. I like the stiffness of leader material on my trolling rods. So I'll run, I'm going to talk to you about the fluorocarbon I run on my main line with my trolling rods, but my leaders are this. I like them stiffer. They give the baits a little more action. The stiffer that line is, it hangs a little stiffer and it gives the baits a little more action. So This is something you should have in your boat, right? You can buy a good spool of it, 16 pound, 20 pound, what I use for most of my walleye fishing. 200-yard spool should cost you somewhere around 13, 14 bucks. You can tie a lot of 6-foot leaders with 200 yards of fishing line. It's going to last you forever. So make sure you've got some good quality leader material for stiff line applications. Okay. All right. Next one I want to talk about is something fairly new, and that is what we're going to call a casting or a trolling fluorocarbon. Now, Sunline was the first company to do this. They came out with what was called FC Crank. That's what I have right here, Crank FC, Crank fluorocarbon. One of the issues with fluorocarbon traditionally is it didn't have a lot of stretch in it. So if you kind of put the hammer to a fish, originally fluorocarbon would actually just snap. It didn't have a lot of built-in stretch. Well, if you're fishing crankbaits or spinner baits, which is where this was designed for, because remember, abrasion resistance, low diameter, right? Great knot strength. That's all advantages of fluorocarbon. But we needed a little bit of stretch for the bass guys fishing crankbaits and spinner baits mostly. So they came up with a fluorocarbon. They formulated a fluorocarbon that has a little bit of stretch in it. Myself and a bunch of guys in the walleye world loved it for trolling. And now they came out with the same exact line, but labeled for walleye guys. It's called Troll FC and comes in a little bit bigger spools, obviously, because we need a little more line. But this is a fluorocarbon, couple things. Thin diameter, 16 pound FC Crank or FC Troll is the same diameter as 10 pound Berkeley XT 013, 13 thousandths of an inch, which works perfect on the Precision Trolling app. It's oval shaped, so it fills the reel better. A round line has a tendency to sit on top of each other. An oval line sits in between, so you can actually get more line on your spool. It has a little bit of stretch, about 16 to 18% stretch built in, which is perfect for pulling crankbaits, casting crankbaits, casting spinnerbaits. It gives those fish just enough stretch to kind of not snap the fluorocarbon, and it gives us good control. And again, it's because it is fluorocarbon, very abrasion resistant for clips. Now, if I don't have a mess on my rods, I'm on my, Jeremy's on it 3 seasons. I have some of my rods. I have 24 rods ready to go on the pontoon. I have some of those rods that are still calibrated that I have used almost every day for the last 3 years. Because I do calibrate them. It doesn't lose its diameter and it doesn't stretch like mono does when it gets wet. So once you get it calibrated, it stays there unless you have a big mix up, and I run a leader. So everything bad happens on my fluorocarbon leader. And if you guys know me, I run a lot of flicker shads on Saginaw Bay, and I run a lot of 25 back, 35 back, 45 back. Those are my 3 numbers 90% of the time. Those releases on the offshore boards are going on the same place time after time after time after time after time again. And I'm getting some of these rods are going to go on their 4th season without being changed. You can't do that monofilament. I don't care what monofilaments you run. You keep putting clips on the same exact spot, you're going to get 10, maybe 12 trips, and that line is going to start to get frayed. It's going to kind of break apart. You're going to see little hairs, and that means that the line is shot. Fluorocarbon Troll FC, Crank FC does not do that. So yes, it's a little more expensive. It's about 3 times the cost of a traditional monofilament, but you're going to get 2, 3, 4 years out of it, and you're not going to have to respool. When I was guiding a typical guide season for me, when I was using the Supernatural Mono, which I still love, the Sunline Supernatural Mono, I was respooling, not recalibrating, respooling because of the wear and tear 2 to 3 times a season. Well, now I've got lines or rods with Troll FC that I'm going on my 4th season without changing the line. So it's kind of a cost value thing. So something to think about as you're rigging up your trolling rods. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Jeez. All right. The last one I want to talk about is a castable fluorocarbon. I use this for 2 different situations. So a castable fluorocarbon like a Sunline FC Sniper, which is kind of one of the leaders in the fluorocarbon world. Thinner diameter. It's kind of more like a Berkeley XL type of line. Thin diameter, very low memory, so it doesn't coil. Lower stretch, so it has very, very high sensitivity. And it's great on spinning reels or bait casting reels. FC Sniper, I think they make all the way down to 2-pound tests. I think they make all the way up to like 60-pound tests. So it's a line you can run on casting rods. You can run it on spinning rods. It doesn't have any memory, so you can cast it all day. It's a great line for casting crankbaits. It's a great line as a main line for slip bobbers. If you like slip bobbers, the slickness lets the bobber slide through very easily, and it has very, very low stretch, so it's got great sensitivity, and you get better hook sets than you do with mono. The other place I use FC Sniper, I carry FC Sniper 4, 6, and 8 pound on my boat. I use it for my leaders on my slip bobber rigs. Leader material is too stiff when those fish can actually look at that. You want that jig. I fish a small jig, it's smaller than this, but I fish a small jig below my slip bobber, and I tie a loop knot. I tie a uni knot and pull it open so there's a loop. And that 4 pound, 6 pound sniper is very, very thin, but it still has all the advantages of fluorocarbon, and it lets that leech kind of move that jig around. So this is something that I use as a leader material. Main line, I use like 10 pound as my main line on my slip bobber rods. I use 4 pound or 6 pound as a leader. Almost all of my, actually almost all of my spinning rods are rigged up with sniper on it. Casting crankbaits, casting small spinner baits for crappies or for walleyes in the weeds, jigging rods that I'm not using braid. So there are some times that I actually do use this FC Sniper for actually casting. So that's kind of an option that I really, really think is a big deal to have. So FC Sniper is good. Roy says he uses Sniper 16 for leaders, jigging and casting. It's a little thinner, and it's not quite as stiff as the leader material is. So it is a good option for jigging leaders and for casting stuff. So if you're casting jigging wraps, if you're casting and retrieving rattle baits, if you're casting and retrieving, puppet minnows or shiver minnows, that type of stuff, the Walleye Nation Creation Rip and Glide, Sniper is a great leader material to use for that. You obviously want a little bit heavier test for that. Okay. All right. Let's